Democratic President Joe Biden and his Republican challenger and predecessor Donald Trump will likely face questions about their economic records Thursday when they meet in the first debate of the 2024 U.S. election campaign. Comparing the two is complicated by the huge disruptions wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic. That led to two of the most extreme quarters of economic contraction and growth in U.S. history, followed by a bout of inflation reminiscent of the 1970s. The broadest measure of an economy's performance is annualized growth in gross domestic product, or GDP, a figure that counts every widget produced, every meal served, and every dollar spent. Quarterly growth during Trump's first 3 years up to the pandemic and Biden's term beginning in 2021 compounded at an almost identical rate that annualizes to around 2.7%. Excluding Biden's first year, arguably still influenced by the pandemic, it was a slower 2.3%. The Biden economy rode a pandemic-era consumer spending boom. Trump's economy saw slightly larger average contributions from business investment. The flip side to GDP is gross domestic income, an estimate of what people and companies earn in return for inventing, producing, and selling all those widgets and services. Trump filled his cabinet with Wall Street allies and boasted of tax cuts for businesses. But companies took a larger share of GDI under Biden. The share for workers stayed fairly constant. As the health crisis eased, inflation spiked to levels not seen in decades. Many economists agree the pandemic response avoided a potential economic catastrophe, but inflation to some degree was a consequence, with a combination of snarled supply chains and record federal deficit spending that began under Trump and continued under Biden, fueling consumer demand. One thing the Trump and Biden economies shared is a strong labor market with low unemployment. Regardless of who's in the White House and whether it is for demographic or other reasons, the U.S. seems to have slipped into a period of sustained demand for workers, with a pandemic rebound that surprised even the most seasoned economists. One key difference between Biden and Trump on jobs is that rising immigration under Biden allowed job growth to continue at a higher level than it might have otherwise, absent higher wages. But overall, despite their positioning as polar opposites, both Biden and Trump have embraced big deficits, overseen historically low unemployment rates, imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, and seen stock markets hit record highs on their watch.
Britain's final debate before next week's general election was a testy standoff, with current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, whose party is trailing in the polls, going head-to-head with Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party. Polling puts Labour far ahead of Sunak's Conservatives by around 20 points.
He's not being honest with everyone.
And on Wednesday, the Prime Minister made a last-ditch attack on Starmer, accusing him of being dishonest on issues from tax and women's rights to immigration. Starmer fired back, saying that Sunak was too rich to understand the concerns of most ordinary Britons. A Snap YouGov poll said the debate had been a 50-50 tie.
They cannot be returned to where they came from, can they, Prime Minister?
On immigration, a top concern for British voters, Sunak rejected Starmer's argument that he would try and return migrants to their home countries, saying many are from Iran, Syria and Afghanistan.
Are you going to sit down with the Iranian Ayatollahs? Are you going to try and do a deal with the Taliban? It's completely nonsensical what you are saying, right? You are taking people for fools, right? I think that these people should not stay in our country. They will be on planes to Rwanda.
Starmer also argued the country was exhausted after 14 years of Conservative chaos and that he would better understand the challenges of many families who have struggled under soaring inflation and a cost of living crisis. Polls indicate Labour on course to win the election with a whopping majority. Sunak's campaign has struggled since the beginning. He launched the election in pouring rain in Downing Street and was heavily criticised for failing to attend a D-Day memorial event. Sir Keir Starmer also attacked the Prime Minister over a recent betting scandal, which saw 5 Conservative Party officials investigated over bets that were placed on the timing of an early election.
Because this isn't just what's happened this week, last week in the Gambling Commission. We saw Partygate earlier in this Parliament. The Prime Minister himself was convicted and fined for breaking the rules which he brought in and imposed on everybody else.
However, Starmer has also faced criticism at public events too. He's been accused by voters of sticking to a script and being robotic, and failing to give enough information on how he would fund much-needed improvements to public services. Ballot boxes open on July the 4th.
From Versailles to the River Seine, the world's best athletes will have the chance to compete in some of the most iconic and historical locations throughout France and Tahiti during the 2024 Summer Olympics. Paris will have 15 competition venues and host 21 of the 32 Olympic sports. Let's take a closer look at what they will look like. On the River Seine, thousands of athletes will parade in boats for the opening ceremony on July 26th. The Seine will also play host to swimmers during triathlon and open water swimming events. It's the first time the river has been deemed safe to swim in since Paris last hosted the Games 100 years ago in 1924. Across the river, the Grand Palais has been renovated to accommodate the fencing and taekwondo events. Beach volleyball competitions will be held on the Champ de Mars, the world-famous garden at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. The Place de la Concorde will host the more urban events, including freestyle BMX, skateboarding and breakdancing. For archery, cycling and athletics events, spectators will head to the Hôtel des Invalides, which houses museums as well as the tomb of Napoleon Bonaparte. Outside of Paris, equestrian events will take place in the famous Versailles Gardens. Sailing events will be held in a brand new nautical centre in the southern city of Marseille. And in a nod to France's overseas territories, surfing events will take place in Teahupo'o, a village on the coast of Tahiti, an island in French Polynesia. The Olympics will bring together 10,500 Olympic athletes from 206 countries, while just weeks later, Paris will play host to 4,400 Paralympic athletes. Events will be watched by more than 13 million spectators and 4 billion television viewers across the world, totaling 100,000 hours of TV broadcasting.
The U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday said it would not impose limits on President Joe Biden's administration's communications with social media platforms. The case involved a lawsuit trying to block the government's efforts to have platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, now called X, take down content the administration deemed misinformation about vaccines and election fraud. The 6-3 ruling by conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett said the plaintiffs, 2 Republican state attorneys general and several social media users, lacked standing to show they'd been harmed. The Biden administration argued that public health officials trying to prevent unnecessary deaths amid a pandemic were performing their duty by alerting platforms about content that violated those platforms' own policies on misinformation.
No more shots! No more shots! No more shots!
But Republicans and various voices on the right argued that the platforms suppressed conservative political views. They claimed that the Biden administration's requests crossed the line into government coercion, a form of state action barred by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Wednesday's ruling reverses a lower court injunction barring an array of government officials communicating with platforms regarding content moderation, such as urging the deletion of certain
A human
posts.
rights group has launched a legal bid to block Shein's expected share listing in London. Stop Uyghur Genocide has written to Britain's Financial Conduct Authority, urging it to refuse permission for an IPO. It's retained a law firm to take up the case. That comes amid concern over labour practices in the China-founded company's supply chain. The group campaigns to protect the Uyghur minority in China's Xinjiang region, where the US and others accuse Beijing of running labour camps. This Reuters video from 2019 shows what China calls a vocational educational training centre. Officials have repeatedly and strongly rejected all claims of abuse at such facilities. However, Shein was forced to drop plans for a New York share sale after US lawmakers raised similar concerns. On Tuesday, Amnesty International said a London IPO would be a badge of shame for the city's stock exchange. It too accused Shein of questionable labour and human rights standards. Reuters sources say the firm confidentially filed for an IPO in early June, paving the way for a listing later this year. Shein has previously said it is strengthening its governance and compliance to address labour worries. The FCA has no power to investigate alleged breaches of legislation not under its remit. including the UK's laws on modern slavery.
A team of firefighters raced down the streets of Delhi on this sweltering day in June. They are responding to a major blaze at a worn-down building that houses textile shops in the old quarter of the Indian capital. It took some 250 firefighters to douse the flames. Summer is particularly busy for the Delhi fire services, but firefighter Indirva Singh can't recall responding to as many fires as this year.
In my 32-year-long career, this has been the hottest year, and Delhi fire services have received the most fire calls this year. We get at least 200 to 250 calls a day.
Temperatures in Delhi have hit record highs this year, with the mercury hitting nearly 120 degrees Fahrenheit on several occasions. Scientists say the heat is being worsened by human-driven climate change. Fire services data shows there were more than 9,000 fire calls between April and June. That's more than double from a year ago. And deaths more than tripled in that period, from 10 a year ago. Reuters spoke to more than a dozen firefighters and officers. Many describe working in doubly strenuous conditions of extreme heat and surging fires. Their shifts are 24 hours long, followed by a day of rest. Director of Delhi Fire Services, Atul Garg, says his men are stretched thin.
They are not able to sleep, they are not, take the rest, because my job is a physical job. This cannot be done by the robot. Sometimes man has to go inside and inhale the smoke and the heat, and then, you get tired also. So fire department is really stretched this time.
Fire officers say electrical failures are responsible for nearly 3/4 of the blazes this summer. As Delhi sweats through one of its longest heat waves on record, demand for air cooling has surged. Round-the-clock use of power-intensive appliances like air conditioning put severe strain on the city's old wiring. Fire officers say improper maintenance of cables and equipment can also lead to short circuits and start fires. Assistant Divisional Officer of Delhi Fire Services, Somveer Singh.
More than 70% of causes of fire are electrical origins only. And in the electrical origins, we can say overloading, 2 is short-circuiting, and 3rd one is the overheating.
The fire service has proposed making it mandatory for commercial buildings to submit an annual fire audit. Officers say that will ensure businesses check if the wiring in their premises can cope with the higher loads. 350 aspiring firefighters are undergoing training and will bolster the all-male force by August. The service is also obtaining smaller vehicles to weave through congested roads and buying technology for hard-to-access areas.
What appeared to be a coup attempt by soldiers in Bolivia failed on Wednesday. A top general leading armed forces allied to him tried to storm the presidential palace in La Paz, with eyewitness video showing an armored vehicle ram palace doors and soldiers rush in. But they quickly pulled back in the evening. And the general, Juan José Zuniga, was arrested hours later on live TV, taken away and later replaced. A Reuters witness saw soldiers withdraw from the central Plaza Murillo Square, home to the presidential palace and Congress. People continued to gather, heeding an earlier call from President Luis Arce to resist the coup attempt.
This is a historic afternoon, not just because the people have retaken Plaza Murillo, but because of a failed coup attempt. I believe the Bolivian people should be at ease. All Bolivians are uniting.
Arce himself later appeared from a balcony and thanked the public.
It fills us with bravery, courage to keep resisting, to keep on resisting any coup attempt. Because Bolivia deserves its democracy, which has been won in the streets and with blood, brothers and sisters.
The president replaced General Zuniga by swearing in Jose Wilson Sanchez as the new military commander and called for calm and order to be restored. Tension is building in Bolivia ahead of general elections next year. Zuniga has recently hit out at leftist ex-president Evo Morales, saying he should not be allowed to return and threatening to block him if he does. Morales is planning a return to power by running against Arce, his one-time socialist ally. Zuniga had also spoken to reporters in the square, saying that anger was growing in the landlocked country. Bolivia has been battling an economic slump with depleted central bank reserves as well as pressure on the Boliviano currency as exports of gas dry up. The public prosecutor's office said it would launch a criminal investigation against Zuniga and others involved in the attempted coup.
Boeing looks set to resume delivering jets in China after being hit by a regulatory probe. That's according to Reuters sources, who say wide-body 777 and 787 planes will start getting to customers within days. Deliveries of 737 MAX jets are expected to resume a little later. Reuters first reported in May that Boeing had halted handing over new planes in the country. That was while Chinese watchdogs reviewed concerns over batteries used in cockpit voice recorders. The delays, combined with factory disruption, led Boeing to warn that second quarter cash burn could be worse than expected. A filing at the end of last year showed Boeing had 85 MAX jets waiting for delivery to Chinese airlines. Around a quarter of those were subsequently delivered by the end of April. Jet makers are largely paid on delivery of their planes, meaning cash flow takes a big hit if new aircraft are stuck at the factory. Separately Thursday, US watchdogs sanctioned Boeing for leaking details of an investigation into the mid-air blowout on a MAX jet in January. Regulators said the firm had blatantly violated the rules by giving confidential material to the media. The National Transportation Safety Board said Boeing would no longer be granted access to information on the investigation.
The yen dropped to its lowest level since 1986 against the dollar on Wednesday. The US dollar traded at 160.39 yen, with Japan's currency hurt by a large interest rate gap between it and the US. The move alerted markets as they looked for signs of intervention from Japanese authorities to boost the struggling currency. Analysts said traders were testing the resolve of Japan's Ministry of Finance and central bank. Authorities spent $62 billion in late April and early May to support the currency when it fell past 160. Japan has already raised interest rates this year to a range of 0 to 0.1%. The US rates are up to 5.5%, meaning investors are flocking to the higher returns on dollar assets. That's driven up the currency versus the yen. Top currency diplomat Masato Kanda said Monday Japan was always ready to take action against excessive market moves. The traders ignored the warning after the last round of intervention did little to stop the selling. There is a chance of a further rate hike from the Bank of Japan in late July, which could help support the yen. Any durable rally is likely to require Federal Reserve interest rate cuts. Friday's US personal consumption expenditure inflation report will be key for currency markets. A lower than expected number could cause traders to raise their bets on Fed rate cuts this year. And that, in turn, could give some relief to Japan's currency. H&M shares plummeted almost 14% on Thursday morning. Investors were put off after the fashion giant missed earnings forecasts and predicted a fall in sales for June. H&M said sales this month are likely to drop 6% against a year earlier, partly due to poor weather in many markets. The update cast doubt on whether the Swedish firm can meet its 10% full-year profit margin target. CEO Daniel Över said the group still believed it could hit that number, but warned the target was now harder to reach. He pointed at factors that influence purchasing expenses and sales revenues, including material costs and exchange rates. Över warned such factors will have a more negative impact than expected in the second quarter. H&M has recently fallen short of key rival Zara and also faces more competition from Shein. Its core of cost-conscious shoppers have been reluctant to spend due to high inflation. H&M said net sales in its second quarter rose 3% against a year earlier, seeing growth in all customer groups. Operating profit hit $672.5 million, up from a year earlier, but below analyst forecasts.